Well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. And for those of you who are new to this format, this is all about solar. And so we do it in sort of three segments here. We're going to do a recap of the weekly news, what's been going on in the solar industry over the last week or so, then look at upcoming webinars, and then we'll do a deep dive into a topic that I find of interest, and hopefully the other folks do. We also have a group of people who are joining us from all over the world who are online, and hopefully you guys will throw some comments in here as we discuss this. So I'll jump right into the news and away we go. So this is the news of the week of November 16th, 2025, just sort of to time check that. So at the UN Climate Change Conference in Brazil, Governor Newsom announced that California has reached a record level of battery storage with 16,942, to be precise, megawatts of capacity available. This is a massive build out that's redefining grid reliability within the state and accelerating the state's transition to 100% clean energy. The new total marks an increase of 1,200 megawatts of capacity over the last 6 months and a 2,100% surge since 2019. California has now built 1/3 of the storage capacity it needs to reach its 2024 or 2045 goals for clean energy. California has now more installed battery capacity than any other jurisdiction in the world other than China. Within the United States, California clearly leads in installed storage, followed distantly by Texas that has 9,000 megawatts of battery capacity. Battery systems provide enough capacity in that state to meet the equivalent of 1/4 of the state's peak load demand for several hours. The renewable energy now supplies 2/3 of the in-state electrical sales, and the state, as they continue to retire fossil fuel plants, they plan to eliminate coal power plants from the state by the end of the year. The California Independent Systems Operator Casio, which serves about 80% of the state's electrical consumers, has on average met demand within that state with 100% clean energy for nearly 6 hours every day so far this year. So quite a ways through on the transition there. U.S. wholesale electric prices are expected to continue to rise, according to a report from the Energy Information Administration, or EIA. The agency forecasts that the load-weighted average of wholesale prices that it tracks has averaged about $47 per megawatt hour in 2025. That's 23% higher than 2024. And they project it will reach $51 per megawatt hour in 2026, or an 8.5% increase. I find that interesting because just a month ago, they were projecting a 4% increase. A month later, they're projecting 8.5%. The one thing about EIA is they have always been wrong. So I think it's going to be much higher than that. Driving the rise in wholesale prices is the projected 45% increase at the Electrical Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT. They're anticipating that natural gas prices are going to increase. That's a big determinant. But in addition to natural gas prices increasing, one of the drivers of this is going to be the fact that peak load demand costs are going to be exceedingly high because they've got these very high price peak load demands and a very small supply. Supply is just not keeping up with it. Texas accounted for 34% of the growth in electrical demand in the United States in 2025. And they're expected that Texas and the couple of surrounding states there will account for 66% of the load growth in 2026. Most of this is from data centers. In addition to the increased load demand, some price increases are directly attributable to fuel costs, primarily natural gas. Natural gas prices are forecasted to rise to about $3.90 this winter per million BTU. That's up from $2.80 just a few months ago, and they're expected it to go up and exceed $4 in 2026. So that's driving a lot of these price increases. Solar panel manufacturer Q Cells revealed last week that it's going to furlough about 1/3 of its workers in two plants in Georgia. About 1,300 workers will be getting reduced pay and reduced working hours due to increased detentions by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection of the solar cells and other panel components that the company is importing into the country in order to assemble them at their Georgia plants. The federal government has stepped up enforcement of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, tortuously called the UFLPA, which restricts Chinese goods made from forced labor from entering the United States. Customs has detained silicon cells made by the South Korean headquartered Q Cells earlier this summer. Q Cells repeatedly states that none of their components are coming from China. So that could be an issue. And similar situation has been affecting Maxeon. That's a solar panel manufacturer with some Chinese financing, but no documented connection to Chinese components. Maxeon's Mexico assembled panels have been prevented from entering the country since the summer of 2024, despite the company providing thousands of pages of documents demonstrating full compliance with the UFLPA Act. Maxeon's filed a complaint with the U.S. Court of International Trade, but they have received no response because the government's been shut down. So we'll see how that works out. A new report from the Institute of Energy Economics and Financial Analysis highlights the opportunity to expand the use of agrivoltaics to bolster generation from renewable energy, at the same time decreasing water use and keeping agricultural yields high on farmland. Agrivoltaics, which is a dual-use integration of solar panels and active farming on the same land, offers a solution that benefits basically all three core stakeholders in this mix. Landowners get a steady revenue stream in a relatively volatile industry while maintaining their land's agricultural productivity. Solar project developers get access to good sites without a lot of permitting battles, and the community retains agricultural land in production, but also gets local investment as well as tax revenue. Now, the process of agrivoltaics is not very widespread. It is growing rapidly, growing from 27,000 acres and 4.5 gigawatts of production in 2020 to more than 62,000 acres and 10 gigawatts in 2024, enough capacity to power about 1.5 million homes. And as of yesterday, that was the news from the solar industry for this week. I did just get a report this morning, that Tesla is recalling some of their power walls because of potential fire issues. And the other one was there was a move to ban the import of Chinese inverters coming into the country. So we'll do a few more details on that next week. I haven't really dug into it because I just got it about half an hour. Anybody have anything they want to add? Al, you've got something there?
Yeah, I just had a question, and this might be a topic for a future day, but solar roofing. One of my neighbors down the street it replaced all of his roofing on multiple roofs with solar roofing. And I know that Tesla was in that business for a while and had some problems, namely fires. Are they still in that business? And and are there others?
Yeah, well, there surely are others. I haven't heard, Tesla made a lot of noise about that, their whole
Right.
solar roof, solar shingles. They made it sound, it was sort of typical Elon Musk. He's promising, robo taxis driving, you to the prom, and they don't come. So I think there was only 3 or 4 of them installed. They were projects. I haven't seen anything that has gone forward. They were just so overpriced as you say, there was problems with them. But Dow has been in the solar shingles for a while. I don't know if they still are, but I've even talked to some smaller venture capitalists who are looking at getting into not really solar shingles, but more like solar metal, roofing panels where you replace a whole big sheet as opposed to the individualized shingles. So I know that there are a number of these companies in that business.
Certainteed is coming up with some good products architecturally and in terms of solar quality as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the issues with solar shingles, I mean, I've always maintained I personally have a bias against them because for one thing, there's always a problem with everything, and if something breaks, you're going to have to pull up your roof as opposed to just replacing a shingle. You also have certain dummy shingles that have to be put in place or roofing because you need a 3 foot walkway that's not going to be electrically active at the sides and at the peak, and so there's I just it feels to me like the only reason for these is aesthetics, and there's a better way of dealing with aesthetic issues than solar shingles. You've got wire management issues. I mean, it just raises a whole bunch of issues around that I feel like there are better solutions. So, but who knows? Obviously your neighbor disagrees, so he's probably spending a fair amount of money on it, so maybe you should ask him for a loan. So yep. All right, any other questions from the group there, or
Yes,
any other comments?
only a comment about the battery storage capacity in California. And I would think that at that level, with 6 hours of capacity, it seems that that would have done a fair job at dealing with the famous California duck curve.
Yeah, I think that was part of their whole motivation for that. But and I think this is a fairly recent phenomenon. So I guess I don't really know what impact it's had that can be measured, other than obviously if you're getting a 6 hour during peak load demand, that's a long way to solving the problem, really. Yep. Any other items? All right. Well, let me jump into the webinars, and if anything pops up in your minds as we go forward, just pipe in. Okay, so we've got a on today, this afternoon. Oops, I just hit the wrong button, and now I got to find myself. We've got it AI and energy, all of that entails at 2 p.m. this afternoon Eastern time. All of these are Eastern time. I'm not giving you links. You can look these things up. I've got on the screen there who's putting them on. So RMI is putting on one about clean energy for data centers. That's also this afternoon. Load uncertainty, how to deal with that. That's the 19th, 10 a.m. Eastern. One about advanced solar design. This is more about terrains, unlevel ground. That's one of the issues with solar on farmland is it's an attractive source because typically the ground has already been leveled, very few trees. Well, now they're saying, okay, when you're dealing with uneven terrain, it presents a whole lot of issues, especially for tracking systems. So that's a webinar there. Fortress Power, this I'm sure is just a product display, but Renview does a pretty good job on these. And if you're interested in their product line, that would be a webinar to attend. Ohio Solar United Neighbors. Solar United is an organization that brings together people who are thinking about installing solar on their homes. They form sort of a large group that can buy and negotiate in bulk with installers and vendors. So it's just answering your questions if you're so inclined to join in there. The energy transition, November 20th, they're talking dueling energy transitions. And I found this one kind of interesting because at the recent Ohio Energy Conference that I went to, you're starting to see a lot of the fossil fuel guys, specifically the natural gas guys, flexing themselves, a bit and strutting around, feeling like this is our day in the sun, our second coming, because they've been kind of in a depression here recently. I mean, everybody's operating at a loss, and they're feeling like prices are going up high enough that now they can start to produce their product at a profit again. So suddenly that means that they're going to be, we're looking at a natural gas transition. I don't buy it because, if their costs went up, if their prices doubled, makes the alternative solar and wind look even more attractive. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out for them. They seem confident at the moment, but being confident and being right are often two different things. There's the November 18th and 19th Intersolar. This is going to be in Texas. That's a face-to-face conference that's coming up. There's Cost Controls Conference, December 11th. This is a webinar, at 2 p.m. A Cable Management webinar on December 16th at 1 p.m. And then there's another conference, Clean Fuels Conference in Orlando, January 19th through the 22nd. And then our shameless plug for our online training courses, as well as face-to-face courses on solarpvtraining.com. And that is all of the webinars that came across my desk here recently. So if somebody has a question or a comment, let's go into this, but let's go ahead and go into the deep dive that we're going to talk about here about plug-in solar. And I've been getting a lot of news articles, people asking me about it. So I just thought, all right, well, let's take a look at this, and hopefully we'll get some folks who are joining us live to have some comments on this, because this is a relatively new industry, a relatively new concept. And so there's not a lot of information out there, but I'll share with you what I have, and then we can all have our opinions about it. Oh, I should mention, as was right there on the screen, that these sessions do qualify for 30 minutes of ETA certification, continuing educational credit. If you're a certified installer with the Electronic Technicians Association. So you can get the certificate on our website if you've attended it. So let's jump in here. What do we mean by plug-in solar? Basically, the other term that you're going to hear bandied about on this is balcony solar. And you can see I threw in a couple of pictures of what this looks like. You can see that this is why they call it balcony solar. It's something where you can install a very small solar system, primarily on the balcony, and that will become understood why we would do this. Largely, spoiler alert, it's like if you're in a situation where you don't have a roof and you don't have a ground, to put these things on. Let's say you're renting an apartment or you're in a condo or something like this. This may be your only solar alternative. So that's the concept. So I don't even want to say this word. What is it? Balkenkraftwerk. Anyway, it's German for balcony solar. And this is sort of where this all began as a concept. In 2019, Germany essentially legalized the concept of just sticking a couple of solar panels and plugging it into your house. So I'm sure people were doing it before, right? People, they can't really stop that behavior, but the German government said, you know what, it's fine. And I'll give you more details on that. So that was what sort of got things started there. But then COVID hit. So everybody's sitting around their home looking for projects or whatever. Well, this became a project, specifically in Germany. People just started doing it. So that kind of gave it a push start within the nation of Germany. And then Russia invaded Ukraine. Prices of electricity, natural gas just skyrocketed, especially within Germany. And so this sort of, again, gave it a second round of momentum within the country of Germany, and France as well, for sure. But the systems within Germany, they're limited to 800 watts. So again, we're not talking about huge things here. We're only talking about two solar panels, two 400-watt panels. So that's the size of the systems. If you figure 4 hours of insolation, 800 watts, I just did a real quick calculation. That comes to about 1,100 kilowatt hours should have said kilowatt hours per year. Um, that's not a lot. In the United States, on average, a suburban home uses about 900 kilowatt hours a month. So a little more than a month's worth of electricity. So if you went to the full 800 watts, you'd be getting what, 1/10 of the electricity that you would consume during the year. So it's obviously not a system that replaces your electrical use. It supplements it. It takes the edge off, essentially. But the big impact was combined in 2024. Germany added 400 megawatts of balcony solar capacity. So that's a lot. That's enough to power about 100,000 homes, depending obviously on usage. But that's, when I looked up to see how much 400 megawatts would power, they said between 70 and 120. So 100,000 homes, that's significant. All right. Then within the United States, what's the situation with this? Well, basically the only state in the US, there is no federal rules on this, but Utah this year passed a bill where they will allow 1,200 watts to be exempt from interconnection rules. So they're basically saying if you have a small enough system within the state of Utah, go ahead and plug it in. You don't have to get approval. It didn't say anything. I guess it applies to your utility as well, but certainly no permitting was required. So you can just go ahead and do that. So that's, and there was, in this article, they did talk about that had an impact on the retail cost of regular solar installation. It actually pushed some of those prices down. So that may be a positive effect of this kind of do-it-yourselfer system, is it may provide a little bit of competition to those people who are selling these as, fully installed from an installation company. We've had discussions before on some of these sessions about how, as an industry, the solar industry has to move from a low volume, high margin industry where the installers are doing only a few projects but charging a lot to do them, to a high volume, low margin where they do a lot more installs with a lot less profit on that, make it up in volume. And something like this may be a motivating factor on that. Probably give them business because people will install them and get it all messed up. So I thought what I would do is just talk about the concept. We'll talk about the concept and the advantages and disadvantages. I sort of called this session "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly," and we're gonna get into the good, the bad, and the ugly of these systems, because there's some hidden ugly in here. But if we look at what is a grid-tied system, just a simple grid-tied solar system, at its heart, you've got some solar panels. There's some wire management stuff where you're either combining them or putting them into a junction box. Then you have to have some way of turning it off. Any power source, you want to be able to turn it off. And then it's going to go to an inverter. The inverter's role is to take the DC electricity that comes from the solar panels and convert that into AC electricity. And then you want some way to turn that off, another disconnect switch. And then if it's a load side connection, typically you take one of the circuit breakers on your service panel, on your circuit breaker box, and you just hook the system into it. And then from there, it's feeding your loads. It's going to the grid if you don't need that much energy. The grid can supplement, so this is where we get into net metering and all of that kind of thing. So this is a simple grid-tied system. For those of you who are regulars here, you know that. But then we started seeing, really 2014 is when they really began to become effective, the use of microinverters. And microinverters are now about 60% of the installs that are done in the residential world. So what you now have is, instead of a string inverter where everything is connected to a large inverter, and the downside of that, of course, is a single point of failure, Plus, just shading issues are over the whole array, not just over a single panel. So anyway, you hook up a microinverter to each panel, and each panel operates independently of every other panel. The power goes from DC to AC right there at the panel. The inverter has what's known as anti-islanding. So if it loses sight of the grid, it shuts down so that you're not feeding the grid when the grid is down. That creates a dangerous situation, and it's by law. You need to make sure you do that, or you need to disconnect your entire system from the grid before you're operating in a standalone mode. So we've got these microinverters. They go to, in this system, this is an N-phase system, it goes to a combiner box. That combiner box is there for larger systems where you can hook up to 4 branch circuits, and you can have up to, with the IQ8 Plus, you can have up to 13 panels in a branch circuit. So this system would accommodate up to 52 panels. But the other thing that's in that combiner box is the communication system. So if you want to monitor the output of your panels, it's got to have that combiner box. You've got to have something that it's going to then take the data of what it's producing and feed it through the internet to your phone. And then it has an AC disconnect, and then you hook into your service panel again, and it goes to your loads, and it goes to the grid, and everything goes back and forth. All right, now you don't have to have that combiner box. I know we've got folks who are on the call. In fact, I think Bill does this, where you do a solar barn raising, make a very simple system where you hook up your microinverter to a solar panel, go to an AC disconnect, and then just connect it to the grid. Dead simple. The only downside, of course, is without that combiner box, you're not going to be monitoring the production, but that's fine. If most people, they monitor it every single day for the first month after they've installed it, and then they probably don't look at it again for 6 months. You just kind of go, yeah, it's still producing. So, we get obsessed about it. It's like having a new toy, and then you forget about the toy. So that's an expensive piece of equipment. Today I think they've gone up, but the old ones were like $600-800. So if you can eliminate that, you've made this system simpler. All right. So the reason I'm pointing this out is because the next step to these plug-in is not too far removed from that. So what is conceptually the design of a plug-in system? Well, it's effectively the same system. You've got a panel with a microinverter. You've got some disconnect, but then it gets plugged in to an outlet, right? Not connected to your service panel. So you plug this thing into the outlet, but that outlet is connected into your service panel. So you're just avoiding that final step. Now, one of the downsides, this sounds very simple. Well, I don't want to, I'll wait until we get to the ugly on that before I tell you why this isn't as great as it looks at first blush. So, all right, so let's talk about the advantages. So how are these guys selling these systems? They come out and they say, yeah, all right, you can do it yourself. Easy peasy, right? Hang it on your railing, point it towards the sun, plug this thing in, and away you go. You're generating power. And when I looked at all these advertisements, that's basically what they say. Just plug this stuff together, stick it towards the sun, plug it into a wall outlet. Yeah. Well, spoiler alert, it's not that simple. It doesn't work that way. It's portable. A lot of people are renting. A lot of people are in condos, things like that. Well, if you're renting, do you really want to install a solar system on your landlord's house? You're probably not going to do it. So if you want to participate in the world of solar, you've got to come up with something that's easily removed, easily moved. So that's a big deal. So the portability of it is big. Scalability, they promote this a lot. You can start small and get bigger, but can you really? I mean, if it's limited to 800 watts in Germany, if it's limited to 1200 watts in Utah, you know, what are you going to do? Go from 2 panels to 3 panels? That doesn't seem very scalable. So we'll talk about that. No permitting. Yeah, big deal there. That's nice. If you've gone through the process, it's a pain, getting permission from your local utility, getting permission from your local jurisdiction that has authority, whatever that is, AHJ, authority having jurisdiction. So no permitting, that's a big deal. And especially this may be your only alternative, really, if you don't have a roof, if you don't have a yard. Um, that's that's a thing. Somebody was just asking me about what about the need for a charge controller. Somebody just had that in the chat. I haven't said anything about batteries yet. You don't need a charge controller unless you got the batteries. And in the world of lithium ion anymore, most of that's going to be kept. The battery management system is going to be in the battery. So the charge controller of it, less of an issue. But and lower electric bills, well, that's kind of the whole point of this, right? This is going to be lowering your electric bills. Okay, I think, do I have one more there? Yeah. Oh, affordable and quick. This is the, there's a certain amount of appeal to all of this, right? I mean, I'm as guilty of this as the next person. When I first see this stuff, I'm like, hey, this sounds great. You just hang up a couple of panels. You've got a little unit there. They plug into something, and then you plug this thing into the wall. And now you've got, in fact, a lot of the headlines I was reading is like 60 million Americans now have access to solar. This sounds great. So I'm only in the good at the moment. So let me throw this open to comments. Anybody who's with us have a comment here?
May I jump in,
You may jump
Jay?
in. Go for it.
So I appreciate your your tagline, the good, the bad, and the ugly. When my sister was dating, that was her criteria when things were all said and done. Germany is leading the league, maybe only behind China, with regard to the amount of renewables, solar and wind, and geothermal. So it makes sense that they would do this in a big way, even though it's only, as you say, limited to 1,200 watts. On the other hand, their consumption on average per residence is much, much less than it is in the United States.
Mhm.
So under normal circumstances, even with German weather, it still has a contribution that can be appreciated. There was commentary with regard to balcony solar or the kits that was being bandied about in the ACES commentary as well. You might recall some of that. And my son has been doing this for years. He lives in Savannah, Georgia, where there are storms all the time, and utility is down for 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 days on occasion. Well, with 2 small panels, a couple of deep cycle batteries, an inverter that we pulled out of a conversion van, he's able to keep his fridges running, keeping his his components, his electronics charged, does the occasional load of laundry, and even lets the air conditioner run on occasion for a short period of time. And that's just the kit that he cobbled together with components. The comment in ACES, of course, and I think you're going to get to it, is that so few Americans have the technical aptitude to do these things on their own. The only way they're going to do this is if they buy a system. And of course, then that system is only going to give them a small amount of electricity that they're going to be able to rely on. But it's possible to do.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay, great. Thank you. Anybody else have a comment? Because I will get to some of those because I think there's a better alternative than this for what your son is trying to accomplish. And I suspect, and just that's the concept of a solar generator, as opposed to one of these. Yeah, Pete, you've got a comment? Pete, you want to jump in? See your hands up. Still got you.
I'll jump in with a quickie if he's not there.
Okay.
The obvious, which is you've got a plug and your prongs are hot. Um, is there safety stuff built in so you don't electrocute yourself plugging it into the wall?
Yeah, that's one I never even considered because you're right. In theory, if that thing's unplugged, you've got two live wires standing out there. You would think there's got to be something, but I didn't see anybody bring that point up. So that's spoken like a true doctor, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah, Pete, I see you're ready.
Yep. Yeah. Morgan asked the same question I did. Is this okay to net meter or to backfeed the meter in Utah if you have a balcony solar system rated to less than 1200 watts?
Yes, yes, that was sort of the whole point of it, is to say, listen, Mr. Utility, you don't have a say in this. We're going to let people connect without your approval, without a net metering agreement, without an interconnection agreement, all of those things. Now, um, I assume there are other requirements. It's got to be, UL certified. What is that, 1741 or whatever about the backfeeding and anti-islanding and arc resistance and all those other things that are part of those standards for the inverters. But yeah, they were basically saying you cannot prohibit people from putting this thing into the grid.
So what
But they're
about
the
in
only state. Yeah.
what
Go
about
ahead.
in Ohio?
No, Ohio. Yeah. It's
Right,
only
like what
Utah.
would the utility do? And I think the rural electric co-ops have a little bit of a different policy too if you get caught backfeeding without an agreement.
Yeah. I don't know what they'd, I mean, obviously you don't want to. You don't want to be, I mean, backfeeding is as opposed to anti-islanding. I guess if you're
That's
backfeeding
so
when
if
the
it's
grid is
sunny and you're
down,
not using
that's
anything.
dangerous.
If you
Yeah.
happen to have a day where you have no load and it's sunny out.
Yeah.
What about
I don't
accident?
think they have a mechanism of enforcing it really.
Okay, but
Uh,
they could
Jay,
notice
on
have a bidirectional meter only.
oh,
Jay,
yeah. Somebody might have a comment on that. Yeah.
yeah, Jay, I was just thinking if you plugged into an EcoFlow battery instead, take your panels to an EcoFlow battery, then you can just use the battery with your grid and nobody's going to know what you're doing.
Yeah. You mean use your battery instead of the grid?
Yes. No, use your battery instead of the panels. Don't take the panels to your panel. Take the solar panels to your battery.
Yeah.
They'll
What
plug
you've
right into your
described.
controller on your battery.
Yeah, you've basically described a solar generator.
Yeah, make a solar generator instead,
Yeah.
and then plug that into your panel if you want to.
Yeah.
Well,
So
doesn't an EcoFlow also have an inverter that converts it back to
Yeah.
his?
Their
Yeah.
controller sits on top of the battery banks. The brand new one is really cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
We
Well, I want to
tried.
make sure, Morgan, were we answering your question there? I didn't want to cut you off on that.
It's a question no one else has been able to answer. What is the utilities policy and is it different utility to utility or is it a statewide?
Well, without state legislation, basically, it's not legal. I mean, right now, and that's when I get into the bad. I mean, my bad is they're small. This is a repeated theme. I mean, you're talking about a couple of panels. Well, for most people, that's going to make a little bit of a difference. I think it was pointed out in Germany or some of these nations where they traditionally have smaller homes and higher electric cost, per kilowatt hour. It may constitute a quarter of your yearly consumption, and that's not nothing, but it's not offsetting everything. So the systems are small, but it's probably illegal. I mean, that's a downside. It's illegal both jurisdictionally, your authority. If they require you to get a permit for solar and you're doing this, you didn't get a permit for solar. You don't have an agreement with your utility. So I can guarantee these things are being sold and being installed throughout the United States right now. But except within the state of Utah, they're probably illegal. That's just probably the reality. Bill, you had a comment on that, or you're applauding?
Yeah. No, I was going to say that Rosenberg, who's also on this session, and I plugged two panels into an AC disconnect from that was on an abandoned apartment. And within 2 days, the our utility got back to me and said, "Bill, what are you doing?" And so they detected that we were generating power. There were no other loads in the apartment, no refrigerator, everything else was turned off, but they noticed that there was power going back to them. And so they were on our case very quickly. The other concern I would have is that if you had somebody with two balconies or a larger balcony that put in two 1200-watt panels, say in Utah, or 200-watt arrays in Utah, and plugged them into two different plugs, those two plugs could be on this.
Whoop, you just went mute there.
Sorry.
Yep, there you go.
Am I on? Okay.
Yeah.
If you plug two of these systems into two different plugins, those plugins could be on the same circuit, and you could be badly overloading the wiring going back to the breaker panel.
Yep. Okay. Well, you're getting to the ugly here in a minute. We're right now just in the bad. It's I keep coming back to this. It's still small. They still say they're scalable, but they're not. It's not like with a traditional install where you say, okay, I'm going to add in 10 panels and then go to 15. You're really talking 3 panels maximum in Utah, 2 panels maximum in Georgia, really, or in Germany, not Georgia. So these things are small. They're easily stolen. I mean, we're already dealing with that. But if you've just invested a couple of $1,000 and you've got this thing hanging there, I mean, part of the portability thing is that it's portable. Well, yeah, guess what? So now are you going to have to invest in some sort of security system to monitor your installs? So I just threw that one in. And then I was thinking, well, 30% of the homes are on homeowners associations, and we're already having trouble with them hating solar about pretty much everything. In fact, in most states, they've had to pass a law saying you can't ban solar, but they sure can ban you hanging solar panels on your balcony. My guess is your neighbors and the guy that didn't like the fact that you took his parking space, he's going to file a complaint. So you're going to have all these other neighbor issue stuff, because part of the whole process here, part of the whole reason for these things is that you're in a place where you don't have a roof, you don't have a yard. Well, now you're dealing with your neighbors. And that's probably going to be a big issue that nobody's raising when they're selling it to it. But then we get into the issue that Bill's bringing up about fire and shock risk. I think Jay had brought up about, you may have live plug ends. We're not used to that when you plug something into the wall, that those little prongs might actually be carrying juice. So, that could be a problem. What happens about arcing if you pull that thing out? Is that going to be an issue? You're dealing with people who don't really know anything about this stuff. And you're just assuming that they're going to do it right. They mentioned in some of the things I was looking at about trip hazards of cords and things of that nature. But what they don't really get into is all of these systems require you have a dedicated circuit for that plug. Now, that to me is a big deal that nobody happened to mention, because if the whole idea is we're just going to plug it into a wall outlet, but then that wall outlet has to be rewired so that it's only one outlet connected to its own circuit breaker going to the specific spot where you want to plug it in, that seems more expensive than just running the wire all the way to your service panel. I mean, who has a dedicated wall outlet out on their balcony? Probably nobody. It's probably built into whatever the living room or whatever you just walked out of. It's just an afterthought wall outlet, but it's got to be dedicated only for solar, only for this unit. And it's got to be adequately sized, Well, chances are it already is. If you've got 15 amp or 20 amp, these things aren't going to be generating that much power, but it's got to be dedicated. So we've got that issue. The ugly, well, they're still small. I don't like this. Obviously, I don't like small. Dedicated circuit, as I said, to me, it doesn't save you a whole lot of money. If all we did is just insert a plug in that run. We're gonna run the wire from in that real cheapy microinverter system. You're just going from the AC disconnect all the way to your service panel and hooking into a dedicated circuit. All we did is just inserted a plug in there. That's it. That added cost. It did not save cost. So, and now if you want batteries, things get complex, right? Because now you got to have an auto disconnect. If you want to use this system when the grid is down, well, you've got to have some way of disconnecting your home from the grid. They don't incorporate that. You know how they solve this? Most of these systems is they just say, oh, well, now just plug into the battery. The same solution that, like Gary was bringing up or other people were bringing up. Why not just plug directly into the battery? Well, that's their solution. Plug directly into the battery. Now we've got an auxiliary little plug there. Now your system is not functioning like it's connected to the grid. You're just plugging your refrigerator or whatever. Now it's a solar generator. That's basically all it is. A very expensive solar generator, but it's a solar generator. And these things are expensive. If I want to look at some of them, I just pulled a couple of them out there. 800-watt thing for $1,500. I mean, those of us on this call, we know kind of what the prices are. I mean, I can get two 400-watt panels. Let's say they're $150 a piece. So that's 300. Two microinverters, let's be generous, and another $150 a piece. So we're up to 600, and some wire. So I could make this thing myself a lot cheaper than that. And that was one of the cheaper ones. Then we go into something like this where you add a battery, and now you're up to, again, an 800-watt system for $2,000. These aren't cheap. They're not inexpensive. So, I mean, my conclusion on this, and then we'll see if other people have different conclusions, was basically they're small. That's my other thing. I'm back to being small. They're expensive. Okay. They claim they're simple, but they can become complex in a real hurry. How do you get that wire? How do you get that dedicated circuit? You're going to have to hire an electrician. You're going to have to tear through your wall. I mean, that's an issue to put an outlet in there, or maybe not, or whatever. So yeah, you didn't have to pull a permit to install these two panels, but you still had to hire a electrician. And they're not practical as a grid backup. A solar generator, to me, is just a lot better idea. The downside of a solar generator is it's not going to reduce your electric bill. I guess you could use it as a dedicated, like use it all the time to run some of your loads. But really, the plug-in has the advantage of lowering your electric bill with hopefully not a lot of monitoring on your part. The solar generator has the ability to serve as a grid backup when the grid goes down for certain loads for a period of time. Certainly requires no permitting, is a lot safer. And I just think if this is what you're looking for, and I suspect that's what people are looking for when they're getting this, it's I think a solar generator is just a lot better idea. All right, so those were my conclusions. Anybody have any comments on this before we call it a day?
Uh, Jay, this is Tom Yates in Minnesota.
Uh-huh.
And I remember back in the 80s, I actually had two of them. There was just a system just like this that was US made. And they were made to plug in for on balconies and that kind of thing. And the one thing about the balconies is that they had their own dedicated receptacle out there for people who had electric grills, that kind of thing on their balconies. And so it was a dedicated circuit. And also, the little box when you was had the circuitry in it, so when you unplugged it from the wall from your receptacle, your balcony receptacle, that it went dead. There was no power on those prongs. You had to have it connected to an AC grid in order for it to turn on and work. And I would assume that's how these are nowadays too. I mean, we have even better circuitry and stuff nowadays. I can't remember the name of what they were. I had two of them. They were advertised in the old Home Power magazine years ago. And they were terrific. They were wonderful. And we had our Gorilla Solar t-shirts that we had with them because this is how we were trying to get the state to get their button gear and start doing net metering. And this is, one of the big steps we had to do. And this is one of the options that we had back then in the early 80s.
Yeah. Well, I know that if it doesn't have a battery attached, those microinverters do have to see the grid. Otherwise, they're not producing. And typically, once they do see the grid, there's going to be a period of time, a 5-minute handshake kind of thing before they do start producing. So it's not going to be an instantaneous kind of situation. Although you may still get some arcing when you're pulling it out of the wall, unless there's some disconnect switch that you turn off before you pull that out while it's producing. Because that, it will shut off, obviously, as soon as you pull it out of the wall. But how quickly is that fast enough to avoid an arc? So that could be an issue. If somebody decides to expand this system, let's say they get into it and they want to add more and more and more, do they expand over the capacity of the wire that's already installed in your home? That could be an issue because a lot of these people don't have basic electrical knowledge, so we all tinker with stuff that we don't understand. So that's a downside, but you get dumb electricians who do the same thing. So that's not a deal breaker. But I just feels like in a situation you mentioned where you do have a dedicated circuit exactly where you want it to be, yeah, this may be a good solution. But I suspect that's going to be a minority of the case, where everything, all the planets align and it makes financial sense. I guess maybe I'm biased too because I look at installing a system, a full-size system, and I think it's not that big of a deal. You can do it yourself as long as you've educated yourself to do it. But the downside is the permitting and all of the steps now that you got to jump through, and the fact that the utility is making it more and more difficult. So from a practical standpoint, I think we're going to see a lot of people, if the utilities make it harder and harder to install a PV system, people are going to do it without their permission. They're just going to do it one way or another. And maybe this is a better solution than just going full gorilla. And we can get your t-shirts, that would be good. And we'll all wear them as we watch our house burn down, So yeah. Al, you got a comment there? Al, you're still muted there. I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, sorry, you've said this before, but if the utility makes their product too expensive, whether that's natural gas or any other or electric, and makes it more difficult to do what you want to do, I think you're going to see a lot more people, especially as battery storage comes down in price, which it has dramatically. I think you're going to see a lot of people that don't live in big houses just go off grid.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that last week as far as grid defection. And I think that's going to be a growing trend because the utilities, they're in sort of a fight for their life, as we're seeing this grid transition where, distributed energy is the cheaper. I can put energy on my home cheaper than the utility can provide energy to me. Well, that's a situation. The barriers to entries just went away as far as their competition. So yeah, so they've responded by trying to pass legislation to prohibit me from doing it and trying to make it more and more difficult and more expensive for me to do it. Well, as you point out, then I don't need you. You know, let's just go alone. Let's just go stand alone. So I think we're going to see that a lot. And I also think we're going to see a lot of this kind of thing where people just go guerrilla and say, you know what, if I can figure it out, I'm just going to plug something into my house and do it. I'm tired of asking permission from these guys who are playing games with me. That's going to lead to some issues, but probably no more dangerous than people deep frying turkeys. I mean, we're seeing all of that kind of silly stuff. So who knows? But we all take risks. All right. Speaking of deep frying turkeys, I'm going to take next week off on this for Thanksgiving. So anyway, we'll see you in 2 weeks. But I'm going to call it here. And I appreciate everybody's attention and enjoy the holidays if you're in the United States, and if you're in Hungary, happy Thanksgiving, right? See you later.